Hello and welcome to a special program from the State College of Florida Plus 50 Encore program. I'm Nan Summers, and I have the great privilege of introducing our speaker for the day, Dr. George Schofield, who has an amazing career from banking and organizational development, and he has now moved into the area of helping people check with the next chapters of their life from ages about 50 onward. And not only is he an expert in this field with a PhD, but he would like you to call him George, so that's fine. He is also living this work. So it's more than just his research and his professional background. He walks his talk. And without further ado, I'd love to present to you George Schofield.
Thank you, Nan. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, happy birthday to State College of Florida. There are great programs, yes. And also I'd like to make a special statement of appreciation to Charles Clapsaddle and to METV because they've been fabulous to work with. I really appreciate that. So there's one thing to understand about what I'm interested in, and that is there's a lot of material out there for seniors. How many of you think of yourself as a senior? I'm shocked you can't be 30. Oh, I see. A senior in college, maybe. So there's lots of material out there for seniors, and seniors certainly need support. How do you get to be a great senior? If you're a great senior and it's not a specific age, let's just pick 85. If you're a great senior at 85, you didn't start at 84. You started earlier in your life. I have grandchildren. I have a fabulous 15-year-old granddaughter. Laura did not start being fabulous at 14. She started a long time before. So one of the things I'm especially interested in is being able to take a look at what we do with this period in our life, starting around 50, because that's the time the kids begin to go away, or we change our relationship with our work, or change our relationship with our relationships, up to but not including elderly. Now, elderly doesn't have a number to the best of my knowledge. Elderly for me will be when I have to turn to my wife or my sons and say, I can't do this anymore, I really need some help on a regular basis. Until then, I'm planning not to be elderly. So, what I want to talk about today, just to be really clear, and for those of you out there in the audience for State College, let's be really clear. This is about that period between 50 and elderly, because how you get to be a great elderly person is by having begun earlier. Now, how many of you are well served by what you were good at 20? You haven't had to acquire any other skills. 0. Same thing's going to happen when you're 85. All the skills that you used at 45 will not necessarily serve you well, and all the approaches to life won't necessarily serve you well. So what's to know is this period between 50 and elderly, whenever that is crucial from a human development standpoint. We have to reach the stage where we begin to let go of some things with appreciation. We have to acknowledge that some of the ways that we've been validated were wonderful then, but aren't necessarily going to serve us well. And we're going to have to move on, but we don't know necessarily what or what to. So in the old days, we could map something. You could do a career plan. When you executed on the career plan and you knew that in 20 years you wanted to be a vice president of manufacturing for the same company, you'd know the company was there. You would know that the job was there. You would know that the path was there. You would know your colleagues were there. How true is that now? Not true. So this is a period of great transition for us. And the thing about this period that's different than a lot of what we've experienced in our lives is not that we're going to have to invent it for ourselves. Of course we're going to have to invent it for ourselves. But I don't think we saw that coming. We expected at 22 that we'd have to invent, right? And we expected at 30 we might have to invent. But at 55 or 65 or 70, this level of invention is not exactly what we were promised. So I'm trying to live this in my own life, and what I want to talk about is some of the core things that you're going to need to know to be able to actually negotiate and navigate this period, or what I call these winding roads. How many of you are living exactly the life that you expected to live? For the record, no one. Okay? How many of you know exactly where you're going and what your life will be like 20 years from now? For the record, no one. So I want to talk about the road from 50 to elderly, what to know. So life's like a road trip. We'll go along straight for a while. We won't see any changes coming. We'll expect it to go straight, and then all of a sudden there's a change. It could be a divorce. It could be your best friend moving away. It could be having a baby. It could be changing jobs. It could be getting laid off. It could be having an automobile accident. It could be just almost anything. The fact is that changes are accelerating now. So our ability to adapt is going to be a key skill for this area. If you think that your future looks like this, then you really want to think about the skills you'll need to navigate. My wife and I were in Atlanta over the New Year's, and we've got a very good GPS. But partway through navigating in a rainstorm in bumper-to-bumper traffic while I'm listening to the GPS and I'm steering, Linda says to me, "I'm really glad you're driving and I'm not, because I wouldn't have gotten the sequence right. I wouldn't have known which off-ramp to take, even though it warned me it was coming up." We're going to have some sort of internal mental GPS. So here are 3 questions. This is your opportunity to participate with hands and voices. How many of you have at least 1/3 to 1/2 of your life ahead of you? Oh, you didn't hold your hand up. Was that mental? Oh, I see. Okay. I thought maybe you knew something that I didn't, and we'd have to set up an appointment for later. Okay. Thank you. Imagine that. 1/3 to half your life left. That's not an inconsiderable period of time. And it's like being a photographer. You're responsible for everything that's in the frame. Do you have the right things in the frame? Are they in the right proportions? Or do you have the right angle? You're going to be responsible for 1/3 to half of your life left to go. For me, that was a sobering notion, if you will, because coasting through a period of dramatic change, when I have that much time left and I want it to be a rich, good experience for me, that was going to require my attention, and not when I got there early on so that I could begin to acquire the skills. How many of you are certain that your health, your money, your friendships, and your skills that you have now will carry you through for the rest of your life? For the record, out there in TV land, no one held up their hand. So we all know in this studio audience that we have a significant portion of our lives left to live, and we're not assured that any of the things we rely on now are going to be what's going to be able to take us forward. Oops, sorry, one more. How many of you consider yourselves flexible enough to switch gears and adapt when life doesn't go according to plan? Fabulous. We have a room full of adapters here. So, give me an example. What's one thing that you might have to adapt to? A change in your health.
Lower income.
Lower income.
No income.
No income.
Lost job. Death of a family member.
Okay, death of a family member. All kinds of things will come along. These are the winding roads I'm talking about. It may look like a straightaway and all of a sudden there's a curve. I'll give you an example. I like to ride a bicycle, and I have a bicycle riding buddy who is a retired airline pilot who is now 68, I think. 2 or 3 years ago, very tall, slender, no body fat. 2 or 3 years ago, he had some sort of stroke and lost the vision in his right eye on no notice. And that vision's never coming back. So although he's retired, it affects his golf, it affects his ability to drive at night, it affects our bicycle riding. He can ride me into the dirt, there's no question about that. But I ride on his left when we ride together, so between us we have three eyes and the full panorama. He did not see that coming, and he's had to learn to be adaptable. His wife has had to step up and do most of the driving, especially the nighttime driving. They didn't see that coming at all. He's not elderly, he's not ill, there's nothing significantly wrong, but he only has vision out of one eye now. And of course he can't fly an airplane because you don't fly an airplane with one eye. Okay, so let's use the metaphors of a car trip. What do you need to know when you go on a car trip? Help me out. Where are you going? Great. What do you need to bring? Who's going? How are you going to get there? What's it going to cost? How much time do you have to do it? What happens if you have answers to those questions, but the answers change as you take the trip? You have to adapt, right, exactly. So it's easy to say those words. It's actually much harder to live life in a way in which we can adapt to those things. And not only that the people around us can adapt and help us adapt. So our communities are going to be very, very important. None of this has to do, and I certainly honor services for seniors, none of this has to do with services for seniors. It has to do with our taking more responsibility for ourselves than anyone else can take. And by the way, that's what it's going to look like for a lot of us as we go along. We'll have lots of support, but we're going to be more responsible for ourselves than anyone else, which is why I named my book, After 50, It's Up to Us. Because I couldn't see the time where clearly my children, my boys will step up for me and my grandchildren will step up for me. But I need to be at least 51% responsible, and that really was the germ of the book. Okay, it's really fun to dream about where you're going. That would be called a rich fantasy life. And I encourage all of you to have a rich fantasy life. But if you're planning a trip and you start with where you're going and you have no assurance it will still be there when you get there, how good a plan can you create for the trip? So, could somebody say no or wiggle or something? So that I'm worried that the studio, that the TV audience will think that I've fooled them and you're all breathing. I want you to know that they're all breathing and they're good. So far, I think they're with me, to tell you the truth. So, what's the smartest route to take? When do you go? How are you going to make this work? If there's a good chance that your destination will not be there in the way that you expect, then you're going to have to be able to adapt when the time comes. So I'll give you an example out of my personal life. I've been friends with a couple in Seattle, Dee and Kevin, for probably 40 years, close to 40. I had children very young. Their boys were young, my boys were young. We've been friends for a very long time. Kevin was diagnosed with cancer and he died at age 70. So I talked to Dee this morning because Kevin's been gone a few months now, and she was talking about how strange it is to be in their house over the holidays, even though their grandchildren are all around. They just thought they were going to be old together, if you will. She wanted to have a conversation about becoming. Well, that's what human development is in this period. It's our own becoming. It's not dishonoring what's gone on before or even pushing it away, but our own becoming may not be fully dependent on who we've been before or what we were good at. So that means we have to have a plan, but the plan needs to start with where we are now. It's so enticing to have a rich fantasy life and imagine what's out there and really focus on that. I'd like to be lying on the beach in Barbados. I'd like someone to bring me a drink with an umbrella and a straw. And I'd just like to have no responsibility for a while. Does that sound even remotely good? Yes. But the fact is that that's not where to start the plan. That can be in my imagination, but that's not where to start the plan. The plan starts with, where am I now? At best, life after 50 is going to be half planning and half execution and adaptation. And the reason that's true is that no matter what we plan, life isn't likely to go fully according to plan. So that's an interesting point. I'd like to have a show of hands of people whose life has gone fully according to plan until now. Not one hand went up, not one. Okay? So why do we have this feeling that if we do retirement planning, that everything's going to go according to plan? I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do planning. Obviously, we need to do planning. But what we don't get is that the discipline of planning really came after the First World War, when everything was growing and everything was changing and things were either growing or stable, and you could be assured that what you planned was pretty much likely to happen if you worked hard. Now, what's our world like now? We're experiencing a revolution in planning, and the real revolution is planning is shorter and shorter term. We can have long-term expectations, but two things are going to have to adapt. One is myself, I'm going to have to adapt, and two, the plan's going to have to adapt. So the success of planning is not that it went according to plan. Success is that the plan and I adapted as we went along. So, here are 3 fallacies to discard. How many of you have a love affair with the notion of there? If I just get there. Okay? And what is it about there that appeals to you the most?
I'm excited if I have a goal, like I just had a book come out, and so I'm like, oh, when it gets to this point, and then instead of even enjoying kind of the release, well, first I'm going to hit these stores, and then I'm going to do that, or
Okay.
that audience.
Okay. Terrific. Anybody else have any affection for there? Stacy?
When you're making a plan, you want to have the there so that you have this thing to look forward to.
Right.
The anticipation of the there is
Right.
very seductive.
Yes, it is. And I'm not suggesting that we don't want to imagine a there. And I'm not suggesting that actually anticipation isn't part of the joy. But what I am suggesting is that the there becomes so concrete that it sets up and anything else will not work. Can you hear the difference?
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm not suggesting you shouldn't have a there. I'm suggesting, one, you don't begin with planning with there. You start with where you are. How much money do you have? What are the skills you need? Who's in your social network? Who are you contacted to? What are your employment possibilities? What are your geographic preferences? Who do you really want to spend your time with? All those kinds of things. Okay? That's where I am now. If I know where I am, then I know how to accommodate. Who do I have to add? Who do I have to let go of? How much more money do I need? All those kinds of things. It really begins with where I am now. And then moving from where I am now, I certainly, and she's absolutely right, want to have it there. But if it oversets up, if it becomes too concrete, and I will not be happy if that, whatever that is, doesn't happen, then I've set myself up to fail, because that's not how life's working right now. Okay? So there are 3 concepts to let go of, the 3 fallacies. One is the notion of there as a concrete, I have to have this or I'll die kind of outcome. The second one is that success in planning means perfect execution of your plan. Nothing went wrong, nothing changed. One of my clients is a CEO, and he actually said to me, this can't be happening to me, I have a plan. His business had made changes, and his industry had made changes. He did not allow for that, because once he'd made the plan, that was it. Okay? The third fallacy to discard is that what you've been good at in the past is necessarily going to serve you well and will be perfect for your future. So could somebody give me an example of something they've been good at in the past that no longer serves them as well?
I used to work on cars. My dad was a car mechanic for a hobby. Now I can't because you've got to just plug in the adapter and it tells you what's wrong. So the
Right.
skills that my dad had are no longer required. So
Right.
that's
They
a
back
change.
my car up to a computer
That's
and it gets tested like,
Plug it into a
tested like
PLC
crazy.
and off it goes.
So
that's a change.
his point is, although he liked to work on cars and his dad was a mechanic, the fact was and is that his old skills aren't adequate to the current task. Anybody else have skills that may be a little bit outmoded or won't work in a given situation?
I think I have a learning curve as it relates to social media and also as it relates to sales. Just the order of the idea of order forms, et cetera, when so many transactions actually now occur on phones or engagements, social engagements on phones, not even on the computer anymore. That's something that I need to grow in.
Great. And I'll give you another example, and that's mom or dad skills. I have a client who's a professional woman who's now 53 working for a 35-year-old woman. She tends to want to mom her boss because her boss is the age of her children. Boy, is that not serving her well. Okay. So whether it's the world of work, whether it's the world of our personal lives, whether it's our financial lives, there are lots of things that we use to be good at that aren't going to serve us well. I raised 2 sons by myself, and I was very, very good from the ages of 3 and 7, and that was at a time that was unusual for men to be single parents. And I got really good at control. I was so organized. Let me tell you, because if you're working full-time, for those of you who have been single parents, if you're working full-time on raising kids, there isn't a lot of latitude. You know what tomorrow night's dinner is tonight. You've got it in the refrigerator, the whole thing. What I didn't expect was that the boys would teach me the most painful lesson of my life, and that is the difference between control and influence. Because they're both well over 6 feet tall, and I could do control like crazy. I couldn't do influence as well. And they really had to be patient and work with me to help me discover that although I was highly expert at doing control, in fact, I was going to have to move to influence because they were going to move and I needed to go with them. Okay? So, the old notion of plotting a course. We do definitely want to have an imagination for our future. I just don't want us to start there and work backwards. I want us to start with where we are now. The old roadmap, plot a course, turn on cruise control, get a job, and 40 years later you retire with a paycheck and a gold watch. How many in the room expect to be able to do that? For the record, not a single hand went up, including mine. So, what has changed? Well, let's just talk about work for a minute. Work is radically redefining itself. We keep talking about jobs. How many times in the newspaper are you hearing that jobs are at a certain level, or we've got an X number of jobs, at which I'm going, what kind of jobs are these, first of all? Second of all, not all work's being done as a job now. There's an expanding ad hoc market where you might work on multiple projects for multiple people, all overlapping. That's how I happen to live my life, if you will. There's also this self-employed world where you create a company and you work in that. There's a whole variety of things there. You might buy a dry cleaner or you might invent a company from scratch. In my case, because I'm a guy who can't do one thing at a time. I mean, I'm a great colleague. I'm very collegial. I do a lot of things well, but I don't want anybody to tell me what time I have to go to work or what time I can go home. It just won't work. So I'm a great consultant and I'm a great colleague and I'm a terrible employee, let's admit it. I reached the stage in my life, back to the skills I had, where I moved from being a great employee to not a very good employee. I needed to find another way, okay? Because that skill wasn't going to work for me anymore. So the world of work is changing. The notion that you'll take a job and the job will stay the same, and it'll have the same title, and you'll have the same boss, and you'll progress up through the organization, which doesn't change, isn't going to happen. So what does that mean for us? What that means is that the planning horizons are shortened, number one. Number two, in many ways, we have outsourced our work future to the companies that we work for. If we take care of them, they'll take care of us. Okay? They will find a way. I think that's too passive for the world now on our parts. We are going to have to be more active and adept. So there's a whole new skill set. Career management, when people think they're in a job for 25 years, they're not doing career management. Of course they're not doing career management. Why should they? The fact is they've outsourced that function, and most companies are not going to take that level of responsibility for us. Retirement. How has retirement changed? Well, for openers, we're going to live longer. So when my parents were 65, they could expect to live maybe 10 years. They only needed 10 years worth of money. They only needed probably 3 years worth of service. They really only needed to be together because they could pretty much care for each other. They needed to bring their costs down to a reasonable amount. And then they had endless leisure. Dead silence. See, in a way, leisure is really seductive. It's what Stacey was talking about. I just don't want to be responsible sometimes. And I just don't want to be in charge sometimes. And I just don't want to be this committed sometimes. But the fact is, a reasonable life now doesn't allow that. I have to be more consciously responsible than my parents did because, number one, I'm going to live longer. So supposing I retired at 65, which is not something that is going to happen to me, not something I'm going to choose, and I lived to be 95. A lot of people in my age range, somewhere between 50 and death, did financial planning through, say, 85. Now, if I live to be 98, where's the other 13 years worth of money going to come from? And people in my age group, and for those of you who are approaching my age, can't save our way out of this. It's not possible usually to earn enough money to both live and to put the money away. So we have high expectations. We have shortened planning horizon. We have longer lives. We're going to want to be more healthy. We're going to want engaged in something. And that may look like multiple income streams, not a job. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to add something.
Okay, let her hand you the microphone, please.
Thank you. I do some research with boomers and beyond, and one of the things that's interesting is there are just the boomer generation alone, the majority do not expect to retire at 65, in part because of the longevity issue.
Right.
The idea of having enough money to live to 98 is huge. And the expectation that they want 100% leisure, I think, is
Right.
not necessarily the same as their parents or their grandparents.
Right.
But also, 15 million boomers did not have kids. So what that means is very different in terms of what happens regarding their health or their living circumstances. They're going to have to either have money to bring in care, or they're going to have to do a lot of exercise and a lot of things that are going to keep them
Right.
healthy until they're 98.
There isn't another generation standing behind them to automatically take care of them. Right, exactly. So understand how different it is. And by the way, each one of us has a slightly different story. So there are things that we have in common, and there are things that we don't have in common at all. Also, I was fascinated in the last 2 or 3 days. How many of you read the material on nextavenue.org? Are you familiar with nextavenue.org? I'm a regular contributor to nextavenue.org, which is PBS. It's the hot PBS website for people over 50. And they had an article about the 5 kinds of people who don't retire. Well, first of all, I was fascinated with the fairly intelligent categorization. People who already had a lot of money and didn't need to, or made good investments. People who, in effect, who couldn't sit still and needed to continue to work. People who didn't have money and couldn't afford to retire. But what fascinated me the most about the article was it seemed to have the notion that retirement is normal, back to what she said. And I think we really have this really shifting relationship with retirement. I'm not sure that we've met the new normal yet, and that it includes retirement. Excuse me. So we've talked about this, longer lives. Where do you get meaning from in your life now? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, oh, sorry, can we hand you the microphone?
My children,
And how do you get meaning from your children in your life?
watching them succeed, watching them be happy.
Okay, watching them succeed, watching them be happy, that's wonderful. Your children will go away one of these days. So I know mine did. So that means that it isn't wonderful now, but it's another example of beginning to imagine what Stacy said, and that is, where's the meaning going to come from unless you move to having grandchildren? They live around the corner, and in effect you've extended the current that current setup. In my case, my grandchildren all live in California and I live here, and by the way, 4 of them lived in Singapore for 7 years. So that was a real experience for me, learning to craft grandparenting literally on the other side of the planet. When it's noon here, it's midnight in Singapore. Anybody else? Where does the meaning in your life come from? Daisy.
Well, since for many years my family wasn't close by, my friends,
Okay.
and the fact that as I've changed locations several times, I've managed to still stay engaged with the friends that I did have and make new ones. But what's been most surprising is, even since I've been in one place, the circle of friends that I have over the last 12 years has changed, but they still bring a lot of meaning, even when they do try to embarrass me.
Sure. Sure. So it isn't that our children won't be meaningful for us, and we can't rely on how much they've given us and how much we've given them for part of it, but it will substantially change. I had a fascinating experience the other night. What Ikebana is Japanese flower arranging, and I'm just moving from level 5, which is the last of the student levels, to the first of the teaching levels in Ikebana, and I did a demonstration at Plymouth Harbor. And the average age of the people that they've got a lot of flower experience and garden club experience, and the average age, I would imagine, was in the early 80s, and a man who was considerably older than that, on a walker, who's a PhD and an award winner, came up and wanted to have this very intellectual conversation with me about his experience of Japan, because his observation was that Japan was moving westward as we were adopting more forms of Buddhism and simplicity, and here I am, this guy with a Swedish English face, now almost within a week of being at the level of being an Ikebana instructor. So we had this very interesting conversation about the cultures coming toward each other. We'll all have to find some way to find other interests and newer interests, and bless our children. My grandchildren provide that to me on a regular basis. I told this story. I went to California to work, and I took my I have 7 grandchildren. I took the oldest 5, ages 5 to 15, which I frequently do, to a movie of their choice. I saw the Gnome movie. I still haven't recovered from the Gnome, Romeo and Juliet. But there was a cultural experience for me. But this time they chose Big Hero 6, which is the most animated movie I've ever seen. And there I am driving my daughter-in-law's mom van, because I can't get all the kids in my rental car, And then we go to dinner at Olive Garden, which because they love pasta, and then we go out for Cold Stone ice cream. So this whole thing starts at 10 in the morning, and it's now 10 o'clock at night by the time we get this whole thing over. I found that for me, if we go back to the list of how the changes have affected me, I look more like one of them, except for the fact that I'm driving and I'm paying. As we're all sitting in the row going, at the movie. If you haven't seen Big Hero 6, it is the most interesting example of a major movie promoting STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and math for kids that I've ever seen. I thought it was a lot more than a kids movie. I thought it was really an amazing social statement about kids and getting enthusiasm going for the different sets of skills. So at the end of the movie, my 15-year-old granddaughter says, so this is an example how they changed. So Papa, what did you really think of the movie? And we know when you're placating us. So if we go back to how these changes affect me, even from the time when I used to take Laura when she was a baby to now, this is only 15 years. This kid has really done amazing things. So I'm finding that I can get a whole set of value out of this high quality time with my grandchildren as well as I did with my children. For me, that's been a lot of fun. Okay. Creating a life plan. Where are you now? Where are you in a whole variety of ways? Ask yourself, where are you going? Do you know where you are now, audience? Okay, yes. Okay. I was going to start to sweat there for a minute. Do you know where you're going? Hopefully. Okay. Hopefully is a very important word because hopefully says I have an idea, but it isn't a guarantee, and I have a set of intentions, and that's a lot healthier than saying, and this is where I'm going, and I'm going to die if I don't. Okay. Do you have the skills you need to go where you're going? Ian.
I think the thing is, George, is to be adaptable and to accept that you're never going to achieve those skills. You're always going to have to learn new skills, because not just hard skills, but soft skills as well. And I think you've always got to assume that round the corner you're going to run into this and say, I don't know how to do this, I've got to learn and achieve a new skill. You've got to have that mentality to survive.
So if I could summarize that, what I heard you say was, no matter how often you think you're there in terms of skills and experience, something's going to come along and surprise you one way or another. Yeah. But knowing that, then, you know that you haven't failed. Because in the old days, not so long ago, in our 50s and 60s, if we didn't have the answer, something was wrong. We can't have the answer now. Question is, can we give ourselves permission to do that? What should you bring along? I love this picture. I love this picture. Bring a good attitude along, the lady says. That's great. So I'm pretty attached to some of who I've been. Is there anybody else who shares that in the room? Okay. But it's not all practical. And I can't bring it all with me because then I've got no space left over. So I loved this image because this young woman wasn't willing to let go of anything, and there's no space for anything new. So whether it's skills, what did you used to be good at that you can let go of with appreciation? Whether it's people, you've been good friends with these people for a long time, but this relationship is no longer serving you well, or you're no longer serving it well. Skills, relationship, structures in your life. We get into being dad in my case, or being an employee, or being a whole variety of things, being a student. I loved being a student. Anybody asks me, to get another degree and I start seriously considering it, I want you to rush right over and hit me in the head with a mallet. Because I am a student in terms of learning on a daily basis. But now with an undergraduate, 2 masters and a PhD, I probably don't need another degree, if you will. There are other things that I would rather do. I'd rather do ikebana and photography and my grandchildren, to tell you the truth. How hard is it to let go of things that you have packed in your suitcase all this time? Little things. I had my grandmother's dining room furniture for years. I ate at that. My kids ate at that. My wife wanted a new dining room set. She should have her new dining room set. So I no longer have my grandmother's furniture. We left it where it came from. All kinds of little examples of things that you sort of stuff in a drawer, or keep in your wallet. I'm not suggesting you need to get rid of all of it. The question is, what serves you well? And what doesn't serve you well? Not how dear is it to you. I'm not suggesting you throw away the things that are totally dear to you. But if in the end it doesn't serve you well and might even get in your way because it blocks you from moving, then you might have to let go of it with appreciation. Life plan. Who should I bring with me? We have an explosion in the United States of after 50 divorces. Why? Well, they're big change. Ian?
I think the main reason is that women have more opportunities today. It's not perfect, they're not there yet, but the equality is heading in the right direction. And my mum's generation,
Right.
What would they have done? Where would they have gone? They wouldn't have got a job with decent pay. So it's a changing world. I think that's one of the main reasons, not the only reason, but one of the main reasons.
And yes, ma'am.
Well, also simply because we are living longer. And, you know,
Right.
you may have been married 50 years and that was a lot 50 years ago, but today, who wants to be married that long to
Right.
the same person? It kind of is that way.
That makes sense, doesn't it? I got a call from the mother of a career client. These parents this boy is just graduating from college and they wanted me to do career work with him, and they wanted him to choose what he was going to be professionally. What 23-year-old, male or female, can pick a profession that's going to last the rest of their lives, or a partner that's going to... I could barely tie my shoes at 22. And when I look at the severity of the lifelong decisions, I understand commitment, I understand the importance to that. But I think if you're going to make a decision at 22 and you're going to live to be 95, 73 years is a really long runway for that decision. So we're going to be faced with these things. Who should I bring along with me? There's one other important thing to talk about, and that is, because someone served you well a number of years ago, by that I don't mean they give you what you need or they wait on you. By that I mean they may not be the right friend or the right partner for you. I have 2 friends who are absolutely adamant that they are retired. And they go to coffee at Starbucks with their dogs 5 mornings a week. And they have very nice conversations. And I go by on my bicycle when I'm making my 20, 25 mile circuit. It's not what I want for me. Okay? So this is really important to understand, that you're going to make some decisions about what you want in your life and who you want in your life. One of the things that my wife and I do well for each other that I most appreciate about her is that we're good networkers, but we network for each other as well as for ourselves. So there's a magazine called Living on the Sun Coast here. I wrote a column for people after 50 for 3 years, I think, for Jeff and Ginny Ornstein at Living on the Sun Coast. That didn't happen because I went to find them. It happened because Linda ran into them, and she said, "This is my husband's expertise, and he's a really good writer." And she came home and said, "There are these people who have a magazine." So those kinds of people, whether it's a spouse or or a friend, the people who are going to help you find the opportunities are going to be really important. But remember, if you all know the same people and your network is dense, meaning you all know the same people and you don't know anybody else, then you're going to have few opportunities than if you have a bigger network with people you know really well and people you don't know very well at all. How will I get there? Well, I'm back to the curving roads, the winding roads. I'm back to the notion that it may look like a straightaway, and it'll be a straightaway for a little while. But then the fact is, there's a curve that's going to come along. It could be an employment curve, it could be a health curve, it could be any kind of curve that you could imagine, or truthfully, a curve that you might not imagine. So it's not unnatural, and you haven't failed. It's just important to understand and recognize the curve when you're in the middle of it. Because it's not a straightaway. Even if you look out and it looks like a straightaway, the chances are, if you're not paying attention to the fact it's a curve, you're going to get surprised. How much will it cost, and how will I pay for it? Well, the things we talk about the most are what? Retirement savings, home equity, what else?
Social Security.
Social Security, thank you. Bingo, the lady gets an A. Now, we're only now beginning to consider the notion that the happiest people will be people with multiple income streams, who have 3 or 4 different sources of small income that add up. Could be a part-time job, it could be something entrepreneurial and a part-time job, it could be a whole combination of things. If you need this in your 90s, when is the time to start it? Now is the answer from the audience. Now is the time to start it. So when Nan Summers said that I'm actually trying to live this, indeed I am. I'm trying to have 4 separate income streams and businesses at the same time that will take me from my 60s into my 90s, and they can be part-time, because I'm an organizational psychologist, meaning I work with businesses. I'm a developmental psychologist, meaning I work with the becoming of people in this age group I'm talking about. I have some rental properties, I manage the managers, I have a speaker-author business, and there's one other I'm planning on starting next year, and then that's it. But the notion is not that I'm so smart or that I'm so driven. The notion is I'm trying to do some really strategic, intelligent planning for myself. There's a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which is the #1 best-selling career book in the world. I'm one of the experts in the back of the book. And if I'm going to be in the back of the book, I ought to be doing it for myself, don't you think? So whatever this looks like for you, now's the time to get with somebody who's a professional, who can help you at least plant the seeds and get some things going, work with your friends, do a whole variety of things. How are you going to pay for it? It's a big deal if you're financed to 73 or 83 and you're still alive at 98. So what a new retirement paradigm looks like. Well, I'm not going to read you the slide, but in effect, we're going to live longer. We're going to be more agile and more effective. 20 years ago, could I ride my bike 30 miles? No. What happened? It's going in the good direction. My father would be shocked that I can ride my bike. In fact, I'm a good enough rider now that I'm getting a brand new bicycle. How about that? I didn't think that at this stage of my life I would be getting a bicycle. We're going to be, if you could write anything else down, write this down. We're going to need to be both interesting and interested. That actually takes a lot of work. Because to be interesting means, like my Ikebana or my businesses or whatever, or my bike, I have to have interest and I need to be actively pursuing them. To be interested means I have to have the ability to put my interests aside and explore what other people are interested in. So in effect, that's one of the reasons that I like to take my grandchildren to a movie and dinner and ice cream because I learned so much about them and what they're interested in. And if you take a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 15-year-old, you really see the variety of things that they're into. And only one of them is a boy, and I raised boys, so trust me, I did not know what spray hair detangler was. But now I know all these things. So I just want to go through the list just a bit. You're going to have to create new social networks. It isn't that you have to trash your old one. But there are two kinds of networks. One is called a strong network. It's people I'm very tight with. They can finish my sentences. We have a lot of history together. We have shared values. They're reliable. And then there's what's called a weak network, W-E-A-K. Those are people I don't know very well. They know people I don't know. They have different ideas. They have a lot of experiences I don't have. Between the strong network and the weak network, where are new opportunities and interests most likely to come from? The weak network. What happens to us as we age and we move into affinity groups? The weak network begins to dissipate. We don't replenish it because we're hanging out with the people that we pretty much agree with. And then they begin to die off. What happens? We become isolated because we didn't take care of the weak network to begin with. And it's the source of replenishing the strong network. Okay? So I'm talking about real life pragmatic skills here that we're all going to have to be aware of. So, the optimistic view. The optimistic view is that you create an intention out there, but you start with where you are so you know what it's going to take to go from where you are to where you want to be, knowing that where you want to be may not quite exist in the way that you imagine it by the time that 20 or 30 years comes along. You're flexible. By the way, humor helps. There's a wonderful song that my wife and I have on a CD, and the lyric is, "Look at yourself. If you had a sense of humor, you would laugh to beat the band." And I play that one song every once in a while just for those lyrics. Look at yourself. If you had a sense of humor, you would laugh to beat the band. Because when I'm down or when I'm sort of my head is stuck, that's a trigger for me. So you'll find your own triggers. And you're going to take ownership. Nobody's going to be more responsible for you than you are. So we have just a few minutes left. I am following the Charles Clapsaddle model of trying to stay to the clock. What kinds of questions do you have? We went through lots of material, and I really appreciate everyone's engagement with me. So where do we start? What kind of question do you have, and what kind of example do you have in your own life of something that you'd like to change or grow?
One of the things that I think many baby boomers are starting to face is being part of what's now that sandwich generation.
Yes.
So how do we deal with the fact that we've got our own retirement planning, if you will, to deal with, while you have an elderly parent who may or may not have planned,
Right.
and having to work with that? And then on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes our children are delaying their entry into full-fledged adulthood.
Right.
Right. As
That's
they
right.
struggle
That was a
with,
very polite way to put it.
as
Delaying
they
their
struggle
entrance.
with finding who and what it is they want to
I
do.
actually wrote a column about this, about paying for college education, grandparents. What happens is, if we're in the middle, that guilt is a powerful force, and responsibility is a powerful force. And what I ended up saying, and you can look on nextavenue.org, look for George Schofield. You can look at the articles that I've published on nextavenue.org, which is PBS. In effect, what I said was, if you endanger your own financial capability and or you endanger your health or the things that are keeping it all together, you're not doing anybody any favors. So I also just wrote and published an article about In fact, it's on nextavenue.org also. The rules that we need to, the ways to create agreement early with our parents. So if you look on nextavenue.org, you'll find the very pragmatic information there. But in essence, if we don't sit down early and have an agreement about how we want it to work and what kind of responsibility we're going to take, then it's not fair to them and it's not fair to us, because it ends up being a fight. So starting early is one thing that you would need to do. Second of all is build some ground rules. Third of all, do you have siblings that are involved in this joyous experience? Daisy?
The way so many of us have siblings that are involved in that kind of experience. They're at a distance.
Thank you. So the third thing is then agree early on who's going to be the primary person, because these decisions shouldn't be made by second-guessing committees. And in the end, I think it's really important that if you had, say, two sisters or two brothers who were always in accord and knew that they would be able to do this together, that's different. But in the average situation, I would say you need to start early, you need to have some ground rules, you need all the paperwork done. You need to have designated one person as the responsible person. And then the fifth thing that I wrote about is you should actually be having regular meetings about how it's going that include both the parent and the adult children. Okay? Because otherwise, everybody's guessing, or it's strictly transactional and not strategic at all. So, anybody? Oh, ma'am, you had a question.
Basically, my question was, I've set myself up a little bit for my future, depending on what the market's going to do with housing, because I have my broker's license in real estate. So my plan is when I retire, I'm not really going to retire. I'm going to open my own business.
Okay.
And I'll be the sole employee.
Right.
However, not knowing what the market is, that's not a real solid plan either, because if it's not good.
Right.
So where do you look to kind of get ideas if you have no idea what else you can have lingering in your future for you to do?
So my suggestion. So the lady said she has her real estate license now. That's a fallback. But there's no guarantee the market will be in place. So here's what I would do. I would find 4 or 5 people who are, in your case, maybe 25 years ahead of you, and I would go interview them. How did you begin to plan? What did you learn? What went wrong? If you had it to do over again, what would you do? Because it's through the process of doing the interview that it won't give you the specific answer you're looking for, but it will broaden your thinking, and actually you'll be able to tap into what people know how to do and where they did it well and where they made their mistakes. So I would take them to lunch. I recommend that to clients frequently. But these need to be people that you admire, and they have what you generally have, something you want, the quality in their lives that you want in yours. And we're out of time. Charles, do I go on or do I stop? Go on. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Michelle gave me an idea. Are you finding that people go back to things that they loved to do when they were younger, or like Ikebana, for you might be something new, looking to things that you might not have done since you were a child, or that you always had fun or always wanted to try? Is that possibly leading to a new career?
It's possible that people had a special affinity for something, and then they took their lives off in a different direction. So I had a client, this woman who loved horses as a little girl. She went off to be a scientist. She was away from horses for a long time. She could fund a small stable and actually board horses. And so she did her financial planning, she did her retirement planning around the notion that she'd done a lot of traveling, she was tired of traveling, she wanted to be centered in a place where she could be around horses. And that was something out of her childhood. On the other hand, in my case, I didn't even know what Ikebana was until probably 20 years ago, and I kept saying, that's something I want to do someday. But I have a prejudice, so let me own my prejudice. I'm not a bucket list guy. And the reason I'm not a bucket list guy is that knowing me, I would have 40 things on my bucket list, and I would only have time for 3, and I would be totally enraged. So I want to do it all now, not necessarily at the same time. And there's some things that I would have liked to have jumped out of an airplane. My wife is suggesting that's not a very good idea at my stage, regardless of whether Mr. Bush did it or Senior did it or not. So I think this is part of the joy of being over 50 is rather than saying, oh, when the kids go away, when I retire, when X happens, when my husband retires, when my wife retires, all these things, there's no reason to wait. So, and I would like to then close by saying, I think retirement is a really dumb word. And the reason it's a dumb word is it's a payroll status. One day I'm on salary, and the next day I'm not. Well, that's about this much of my life, because I have all these other things that are in it. So I'm trying to work with notions of reframing our becoming and focusing on quality of life and building it in the midst of our drowning in outdated language like retirement. Notion of retirement does not serve us well. Not only is it not financially practical for a lot of people, but the fact is, it's only an employment status. One day you're employed, the next day you're not. Poof, most of us have been there before. I think we're bigger and better than that. So I would like to thank you all for your attention, including all of you out there. I really appreciate the time, and I wish you great lives. Thank you.